WISC-TV now presents For the Record.
A conversation with Wisconsin Congressman Mark Pocan is next on For the Record. Thanks for joining us, everyone. I'm Neil Heinen. The list of issues about which to speak with Congressman Pocan is so long it makes no sense wasting time enumerating it. Let's just get right to it as I welcome back to For the Record 2nd District U.S. Representative Mark Pocan. Congressman, thanks for coming back.
Thank you, Neil.
I know you've been here a couple of times recently for town hall meetings. What are you hearing?
You know, a lot of stuff. As you said, it's hard. There's so many things going on, from what just happened in Syria and the big bomb this week that was dropped in Afghanistan to...
You were on campus this week.
And also earlier this week you were in Rock County.
Okay.
With the town hall.
Okay.
Healthcare still comes up. People worried about, getting cuts in Medicaid, and the Trump proposed budget comes up a lot because there's a lot of things. If you put $54 billion additional in defense and you don't put any revenue in, you're going to have a lot of deep cuts in a lot of other areas. That came up. Infrastructure comes up. What's the infrastructure package going to be? Because we expect that to happen soon.
Did you get good turnout, Mark, at these things?
Yeah, very good. Yeah, no, we've been very happy, and we do a lot of outreach. We try to once a month do a Facebook Live town hall when I'm in D.C. too. So we're real aggressive on this because my job, as I see it, is to take what people are telling me in South Central Wisconsin to Washington, and then try to explain what's going on in Washington, back here at home.
Sure.
So we do a lot of this stuff, but it's great to be home and do face-to-face. There's nothing like face-to-face conversations.
I'm just curious because, again, this week there were stories in the national newspapers about town hall meetings around the country, around citizens speaking out. Now, there's a comparison to what the Democrats went through with the Tea Party a while back and now what the Republicans are going through with some of what they're hearing. But just the whole idea of elected representatives getting out and meeting with the public is very dynamic right now.
Yeah, and Jim Sensenbrenner, I think, leads our delegation. He does a lot of these town halls, and I know some of them are a little rougher, but I give him credit. I mean, that's what we should be doing. Yeah. So when I get back home, and they've had us out in Washington a lot the first 100 days, but when I get back home, we try to make sure we're getting out to all the parts of the district and having these conversations, and if I'm in Washington, we're going to find a way to still do that.
So give me your perspective, Congressman, on the week's news having to do with Syria in particular, and then this bombing in Afghanistan. How concerned are you?
Well, here's where my concern is. I think, and it's not just me, there's Democrats and Republicans who think that the Constitution very clearly says you have to come to Congress if you're going to do some of these things. Right. And because they're using a very loose authorization back from 9/11, that I disagreed with President Obama's use, and I'm disagreeing with President Trump's use. They have to come back and let us have that debate because we are the closest to the people. It's in the Constitution that we have this responsibility, and for a president to just go ahead and do this on his own, we don't want to start down this path. So recently I led a bipartisan letter with 55 members of Congress signing around Yemen because the president said we might go into Yemen, and we already saw the somewhat botched attempt earlier this year that happened in Yemen. We want to make sure that Congress is doing what our job is, which is having these debates and whether or not we give that authorization. And we've got to make sure that this president does it.
To what degree does President Assad's use of gas, to the best of our knowledge, in Syria elevate the seriousness of that situation?
It elevates the seriousness that we need to be involved with other countries and making sure that we're putting real pressure to make sure that doesn't happen. And there's a lot of things we could have done from the UN to a lot of other places first. The problem is we dropped $100 million worth of bombs on an airstrip that they flew out of the next day. And right now, President Trump's high-fiving everybody. I don't know if it's a high-five worthy moment, but more importantly, are there better ways that we could have done and still can do to try to make sure that this person does not gas his own people, which is a horrific act. And I would argue there's a lot of things we could do from working with the UN, as there was an attempt this week, and others, to try to put some serious pressure on. But let's have that debate. Let's have Congress do that proper debate, and then we can decide when you get to the point of actually starting to have military actions, because otherwise the people who are on the ground are at risk based on one person's decision. And I think that now is the time with a new president to make sure we get this flushed out.
From what you know, or from what you've been told, Congressman, how does this influence our relationship with Russia, with this president's relationship with Russia, that whole complicated mess?
Yeah, this is like a bad Daniel Steele novel of some sort, right? And you know, you've got the Putin-Trump romance through the campaign, and we clearly know, based on intelligence agencies telling us, that Trump was selected by Putin as he interfered with elections. He wanted Trump to win. Trump did win. We know the Russian government interfered with our elections in multiple ways, and more will still come out on that front because I've read things in classified reports that I think good journalism has been starting to show some of these things. And the fact now that you've got this real confrontation with Russia, you know, because he won't release his tax records, because he won't separate his business dealings, there's a lot of second guessing. Is this part of a show because he's in fire along with his campaign team and his administration officials, and even his son-in-law, who's was covertly meeting with Russian officials during the campaign, or is this something that's real? We just don't know. And I can't remember a time that we've been so uncertain with an administration that are things being done for the right reasons, the wrong reasons, how involved, what's going on, and it makes it very hard for us, regardless of any partisan affiliation, to really put full trust in this administration as they move forward.
I want to get back to some of the inside stuff in a minute, but just in terms of, as you watch Secretary of State Tillerson act here, as you watch the Joint Chiefs of Staff and whatever role they have in this, the last week's events, what does it say about our foreign policy infrastructure right now?
Well, and that's part of the problem. Part of, in my opinion, and I think including the military's opinion, part of our overall foreign policy infrastructure includes the State Department, and there's a ton of empty slots in the State Department right now. And we saw that in the Trump budget, there's a 28% cut, or almost 29% cut to the State Department. And even the military is saying, no, we're glad to get $54 billion if you're going to give it to us, but don't cut that. That's part of our job. And I think we're really seeing that disconnect with the Trump administration right now. He apparently thinks dropping the biggest bomb we've ever dropped outside of a military conflict is diplomacy, it seems like, and what he did in Syria, where, again, I don't know how you spend $100 million on 59 bombs dropping on an airfield that you can fly out of the next day and call that a success. I'm worried that this is just a bad policy right now happening out of the Trump administration, and part of why you want that broader infrastructure is so you can do things that also are seen as good around the world, sure. And we're not showing a real emphasis on that.
I want to talk about health care, I want to talk about the tax plan, and we will do that with Congressman Mark Pocan when we come back right after this. I am back with Wisconsin's 2nd District Congressman Mark Pocan as we have a conversation about the events of the last week and the last couple of weeks. And I am just curious, Congressman, as you go to work every day, as you meet with your caucus, do you get any sense that what we're reading about obsessively between infighting between Steve Bannon and Jared Kushner and even Reince Priebus, do you see any impact of that? Is that influence palpable?
Clearly, yes.
Okay.
Part of it is you go from one president to another, there's some disruption. You go from political party to another political party, there's disruption. And then you go to this particular president who has no previous experience in government and brought in a bunch of people with little to no previous experience. We're seeing a very rough ride. I mean, clearly this is an administration on its training wheels and it's still falling down. We are hopeful that things will change, and there have been some positive signs. I mean, Steve Bannon appears, being off the National Security Council is a very positive thing because he's someone who shouldn't be in any position of authority by, I think, a lot of measures. So we've had a little bit of positive movement on that, but in general, we're still seeing a lot of missteps. You can't, the way they did a health care bill is like a 101 of how not to get a bill passed in Congress. And part of that blame goes to the House leadership, and part of that blame goes to the president. But, clearly that was a big failure. After 7 years, they couldn't come up with an alternative to the health care plan and had a dismal failure. That makes it harder for them to get a lot more things done as the session goes on.
It's interesting because in this particular battle, all of a sudden you've got days when it looks like Kushner's the good guy, if you consider Bannon the bad guy. And does Mr. Kushner really have a legitimate place in the administration right now?
Well, it's hard, right, because you've got his family all coming in because he trusts his family. Yep. But, let's remember, Steve Bannon got in politics in around August of last year is when he came onto the campaign. Prior to that, he was doing, one of these websites out there with kind of a very conservative slant. So this guy's new to politics, and he's taking a lot of serious advice from someone like that, and Donald Trump doesn't have the background. And quite honestly, his family doesn't have the background. Sometimes you just want some consistency and some level of expertise. Even if I disagree, at least I know the thought pattern that went in. In the last week, there are 6 major issues that Donald Trump flipped on 180 degrees from where he stood previously. Right. That kind of inconsistency doesn't give any confidence to the international world. Yep. It doesn't give confidence to, I think, the business sector here in the United States, and it is worrisome. So, it's a tough time to be in Washington because we're watching a lot of missteps that didn't have to happen, and we're wondering when or if they'll ever stop. Let
me ask you about 2 issues. I don't know if they're 2 of the 6. But the health care conversation now, and particularly what the president has said about subsidies that he's hoping are going to win Democratic support, and the tax plan, which apparently Congressman Ryan and Senator Johnson disagree on. Are either of those Trump plans, or were they Bannon plans? Or
the best way to describe on the health care proposal, right? The Trump administration referred to their health care plan as Ryan Care. The House Republicans referred to it as Trump Care. When no one wants to put their name on it, that's the first sign that there's something wrong, right? So that should tell you a lot. The bottom line is, if you're going to do a health care proposal that's going to replace what now covers 20 million new people in health insurance, has set a bar for if you have a pre-existing condition, you should still be able to get health insurance. You shouldn't have a lifetime cap. Women shouldn't pay more than men. A lot of very reasonable things that now the public accepts. You have to make sure that you're making sure that people still have access, full access to health care, and you're making it more affordable. And the problem with the Republican plan, it was $600 billion worth of tax breaks, first of all, for the wealthiest and for insurance companies and big pharma and medical device companies. That was a big, big part of the bill. But 24 million people were going to lose their health insurance. And I was on a panel this week with Sean Duffy, and he said, well, that's because 24 million people are choosing they don't want health insurance. No, because the subsidies and because older Americans are going to pay 5 times more than others. If you're making $26,000 in Rock County and you're maybe a semi-retired farmer, your subsidy now changed from the current Affordable Care Act under the Republican plan. You're going to be paying $14,000 more. Your choice not to get health care is because you're choosing to eat instead. But that's not really a choice. So that's the problem. Their plan had many flaws. And in the Republican caucus, you have the Tea Party. But on the other end, that didn't get as much attention, are the 23 Republicans who Hillary Clinton won their district, have a swing district, and about 10 moderates. So you have problems on both sides of the Republican caucus. So the fact that they don't agree on health care or they don't agree on tax reform is going to continue to happen, and until someone really stands up to mainly the Tea Party and maybe reaches across the aisle and tries to work with us, I think you're going to see this dysfunction continue.
At the risk of eliciting a laugh, can you give us, what is your best guess, Mark, about what we'll see in healthcare in the next 6 months? Anything? Nothing?
As we now know, healthcare is hard, right? We've heard from the president, it's a little more difficult than maybe they thought. And I think that they're going to keep trying something. The day we left before this break, coming home, they put a proposal out there around high-risk pools that really don't do enough. Anyway, they're going to keep trying to work around the edges. Bottom line, it is going to be very difficult. And part of the reason they did it the way they did with all that tax reform in the health care bill, all the tax cuts for the wealthy, was because that's one of the other things they want to get done that I would argue is even more difficult than health care. I would say 20% of my meetings in Congress and D.C., and my staff said even a greater percent for them, are around people about the tax code, because everyone's got their little carve-out, and to try to reform that's going to be very difficult. And the proposal right now that they're floating around a border adjustment tax has all sorts of problems. There's all kinds of companies in South Central Wisconsin that have come to me that will likely not be in business if something like that passes. So it's a heavy lift, and governing is hard. Tweeting is easy. 140 characters at a time, that's an easy job, but actually governing is difficult.
But do you tell citizens when they ask you, when they express their fears about losing the health care that they've gotten now under the Affordable Care Act, are they safe for the immediate future?
Here's what I recommend. I mean, people, one, should keep contacting their members of Congress and U.S. senators, as well as their state legislators on issues, because they're having a big effect. I've seen multiple wins, including the Trump care defeat was largely because people called, and those moderates and swing district people were as equal of a resistance as the Tea Party was on that proposal. Two, use your social media and get other friends to also be active and keep doing this stuff. And three, join the groups that are working on issues that you think are most in jeopardy locally and nationally, and double down with them to magnify your voice. We're having huge victories from the first day of Congress when they were going to gut ethics laws for members of Congress and people called, they didn't put that proposal out there, to putting a Secretary of Labor nominee out there who was one of the biggest violators of labor law in the country and said he preferred robots to employees, human employees, because they don't get sick and they don't take vacations. There was pushback. They had to take away that nomination, to the defeat of Trump care and many other things. We're winning right now. So when something finally does get through the net that I'm trying to block in Congress, then we're going to have legal challenges from states and outside groups, and we're going to keep doing everything we can to stop things, but we're also going to put positive alternatives out there. And the Progressive Caucus that I'm the first vice chair of, and we're the largest values-based caucus within the Democratic Party, 73 members strong, we're going to be putting in 2 weeks our budget proposal that'll show a lot of these ideas and paths forward. So we're going to do both. We're going to fight the bad stuff, but we're going to show people there are positive alternatives. You can have something else than what you have right now.
We're going to continue our conversation with Congressman Mark Pocan when we come back right after this. We continue our conversation with Wisconsin Congressman Mark Pocan. So I don't know how many people have asked you this, but if they do, what can Congress do about the airlines?
I'll tell you.
Did you get some questions? I mean, people are frustrated like I've never seen.
A lot of conversation, not so many questions on it, but a lot of conversation around it. And let me tell you one thing that we are working on. I've got this project that you and I have talked about previously, trying to talk about the future of work and labor, and we're going around the country doing kind of listening sessions and work with some of the major universities that do this. I've got some colleagues coming out this coming week from around the country to Madison to talk to the people at the University of Wisconsin around this. And one of the things we found through our conversations is that because of some of the antitrust law changes that happened about 3 or 4 decades ago, we have seen this capacity where all these, you have these consolidated industries where they don't have to be responsive to consumers anymore. And on top of it, in some industries, not only is it down to 4 or 5 major players, so they don't have to be responsive to us or their employees, the board of directors might have some of the same people on multiple board of directors of those consolidated companies, which is why all they care about are the money that's going to the very top. So there's some real antitrust issues that we're exploring as we look at this future of work, and this is exactly what's happened in the airline industry. When you only have a few major players, they don't have to be responsive to us. They can literally, you know, their new drop and drag feature appears to be when you're on the plane and they take you out and do something like that. And I think that's just an illustration of what we need to change. And I think, you know, this work that we're doing is helping to highlight some of that. And I think you're going to see by the end of the year some bills introduced. You'll see some probably immediate bills around this, but I'm talking on the big picture on antitrust. I think you're going to see some things trying to really make more people understand what the big problem is.
Likely gaining more support from citizens than they might otherwise as a result of
Absolutely.
this.
You know, I'm a small business owner for almost 3 decades. In Wisconsin, you know, we have a really great business environment here. When you look at things like tax inversions, the big loopholes that some of the big corporations, you know, try to take advantage of that are really legal, but you know, everyone would argue unethical. We only have 2 or 3 people in Wisconsin taking advantage of that. By and large, our businesses pay their taxes, they follow the laws, we've got a great business climate, but there's a lot of bad players out there, and they are making an undue burden on the rest of us. In fact, somewhere I just read in a study, we on average pay probably about $5,600 more in taxes as we are this tax weekend than we would have to, because of some of these companies aren't paying their fair share and they hide their profits overseas. That's a real issue.
Let me ask you about something I know is near and dear to your heart, Congressman, that it's actually on this show next week, a group called United Against Hate. So I had Masood Akhtar and Nino Amato, Dale Schultz, people you know, Rabbi Margulies. And there is indeed, there seems to be a growing interest in coming together across racial lines, across religious lines, in response to a lot of the things we're seeing. And yet we saw another hate crime apparently in Milwaukee this week that was particularly ugly. Do you get any sense, as you're going around your district talking to people, that there is this new enthusiasm for taking on these hate-related issues at that level, at that citizen level.
Again, this is where, the grassroots, people doing people-to-people actions are going to win out, because, clearly there's a lot of mixed signals coming from this administration, from this president, and that's allowed some of these people who harbor this hate to feel like they've got a pass to go ahead and do some things. But we know the vast majority of people don't have that kind of hate in their heart. But the fact that they're organizing and working together around this is going to help us in a bigger and broader way on this. So again, for every maybe one step backward, we still have 2 steps forward on this, because people are banding together and do these things. And in the end, I think that's going to be an incredibly positive thing to helping us, move forward as a society. So I try to find the silver lining. That I've always tried to do that. And in this area, I see a more than a silver lining. I mean, this is almost platinum.
I always am afraid that we miss some of the really important issues. I mean, we focus on the ones that are in the news that you're working on at the committee level that are important to you. In the last couple of minutes here, what are you hoping to get done in the next couple of years?
So I just moved to the Appropriations Committee. Right. So I serve on the Labor, Health and Human Services Education Subcommittee and the Agriculture Subcommittee. I'll tell you one issue I think for a lot of our listeners that's a really big issue, and it's been a big mission of mine in Congress, is we have a real problem with rural broadband. In Wisconsin, Scott Walker, when got elected, he gave $23 million back to the feds that he could have used to expand broadband. I live in the town of Vermont. My neighbors across the street, their kids can't even do their homework, and I hear this across the district. So I started a rural broadband caucus, a bipartisan caucus. We have 3 Republican and 3 Democratic co-chairs. I had more people who wanted to be co-chairs. We had to stop at 3 and 3, but it's a good thing. And my Agriculture Subcommittee and Appropriations is partially responsible for rural broadband. So I have had breakfast with the chairman of the committee. I've got members of the committee that have offered to work with me on this. And we're trying to get those kind of issues out there, because these days I think broadband is like electricity or water. Yeah. And if you don't have it, you can't run a business, your kids can't do homework. And that's an issue that I'm a little obsessed on, I guess I would say.
It's a fundamental economic development issue. Absolutely. And an equity issue as well. Yeah. Congressman, thanks for doing this. Nice to see you again.
Well, thank you very much, Neil.
We're going to come back and wrap up For the Record right after this. My thanks to Congressman Mark Pocan, and thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week on For the Record.